Hi, everyone. Good day. Distinguished members and dear colleagues and friends, a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this joint IGF Working Group and SME Finance Working Group webinar on Inclusive Green Finance for Greening MSMEs. This is the last webinar of this year. And yeah, it's wonderful to see so many familiar names and new participants coming together to mark the launch of these two new AFI knowledge products. That in this case is the case studies named SMEs as agents of green change and the toolkit on inclusive green finance policies for greening MSMEs. These publications represent the culmination of our collective learning journey over the past years. They build off the foundation laid by the green transition and measures for MSMEs and translate that knowledge into practical action-oriented guidance. So for those who doesn't know me, I'm Laura Ramos. I'm the Senior Policy Manager for the Inclusive Green Finance. And the next slide, please. And before we start, I would like to give you a very brief housekeeping guidelines. So for the session, please, I would like to invite you to mute yourself. And if you would like to contribute to this session or ask any question towards the end of the session, please just unmute yourself or use the raise hand function that is at the bottom of your screen. Also, you can use the chat for greeting everyone or for posting your questions, which I encourage you to do so. And well, as I'm saying, I will invite you to proceed with that we proceed with the sessions with presentations first, and then we will finalize with the Q&A session. Next slide, please. In this case, what I was hold on. Next one, please, and we come back for the photo. What I was saying is that these case studies that we are presenting tonight or today speaks out of Eswatini and Zambia, and it illustrates how coordinated national action anchored in inclusive and evidence-based policymaking can empower MSMEs not only to survive, but to thrive as drivers of climate resilience and innovation. The toolkit that we are also here about it today on in IGF Greening MSMEs takes these lessons forward, offering regulators and policymakers a structured three-phase process to design, implement, and monitor IGF frameworks that expand access to green finance while advancing national climate and development goals. It reminds us that IGF is not another policy layer. It's an approach that intentionally aligns financial inclusion, climate resilience, and sustainable growth under a coherent regulatory architecture. In today's session, we will explore how these two complementary publications can help us translate vision into action. We will discuss how to further strengthen collaboration between the IGF Working Group and the SME Finance Working Group in advancing MSMEs, green finance ecosystems. And on behalf of AFI, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the contributors, especially to our members from Ministries of Finance in Eswatini and Zambia, our working group experts, and our partners whose dedication make this work possible. So thank you all for joining us today and for your continued commitment to inclusive and sustainable finance. Together, we are shaping financial systems that are not only greener, but fairer and more resilient for all. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite you to switch on your camera and put a big smile on your face. We would like to take your photo if that's convenient for you. So please Kat, if you can help us and let us know if you are taking the screenshot.
Yes. If you can have some more people putting on their cameras, quite a few.
Could you please help us? Yeah.
Yeah.
Switching on the cameras will be really great for taking just one shot.
Yes. Okay. So ready. 1, 2, 3. One second. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, with this, I would like to invite you to join me welcoming my colleague, Nick Cameron. He is the Senior Policy Manager for the SME Finance Working Group, who will be moderating this session. So thank you, Nick, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Am I audible?
Yes.
Just confirm. Yes. Thank you. As rightly mentioned by Laura, I'm going to give a bit of a context setting for this session. So the first session, we're going to delve into the details of the two case study, and this will be delivered by Ms. Alexandra Sanchez. I'm going to mentions more details about it later. And the second session will be more on the toolkit, where Ms. Eden Dema will take us through on the step-by-step for policy greening MSME. Can I have Mina Fakri to unmute yourself? Mina Fakri, please unmute yourself. Thank you. So before we begin, let me give a bit of context of MSME and green. MSME are the heartbeat of our economies. They drive jobs, innovations, and growth. Yet they have remained among the most vulnerable to climate risk, economic shocks, and persistent barriers to finance. Helping MSME transition to greener and more resilient business model is no longer a choice, it is an urgent necessity. Inclusive green finance provide a transformative way forward by linking financial inclusion with climate resilience. IGF empowers MSME to adopt sustainable practices that not only strengthen their own operation but also contribute directly to national climate and development goals. In today's session, we will be introducing two new AFI knowledge products designed to help policymakers and regulators plan, design, and implement national strategy that enable MSME to thrive in the green economy. Participants will hear the case study from Eswatini and Zambia, two countries that have charted inspiring national roadmap for green MSME finance. Their experiences will be complemented by a step-by-step walkthrough of AFI Toolkit, a practical guide that supports the planning, formulation, and implementations of IGF policy tailored to national context. Beyond showcasing these tools and experiences, this webinar serves as a platform for peer learning and collaboration, where we will discuss emerging challenges, share innovative solutions, and explore how members of the Inclusive Green Finance Working Group and SME Finance Working Group can work together to strengthen green MSME finance ecosystem. In short, our discussion will help us to understand the policy approaches that enable MSME to lead green transition, draw lessons from Eswatini and Zambia roadmap journey, and learn how to apply AFI structure toolkit in practical, country-driven way, and finally, identify opportunities for collaboration and to scale up inclusive, climate-resilient MSME finance. Together, let's explore how MSME can move from being vulnerable to becoming powerful agent of green change. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Miss Miss Alexandra Sanchez. A bit of bio for Miss Alexandra. Alexandra is an inclusive finance and market research expert. Alexandra is a financial inclusion specialist with 15 years of international experience across Africa, Latin America, and global markets. She has led research, market diagnostic, and research and strategy design to advance digital finance, gender inclusive green finance, and MSME access to finance services. Alexandra has worked with organizations including AFI, WFP, WSBI, and UNCDF. Earlier, she worked with Microfinance International Corporation, building cross-border remittances and mobile money partnership across banks, MFI, and mobile operators. She works in English, Spanish, and French. Without further ado, please welcome Alexandra.
Thank you, Nick. I think is it Kat that's going through the slides? Okay, great, perfect. Well, as mentioned by Nick, this case study forms part of a three-part AFI knowledge product. And this case study in particular that I'm going to be speaking about highlights how the Ministry of Finance in Eswatini and Zambia, their experience in developing national inclusive green finance roadmaps to expand MSMEs' access to green finance and strengthen sustainable enterprise capacity. Next slide, please. Nick briefly touched upon it, but why do MSMEs matter for green transition? I think we all know that micro, small, and medium enterprises are the backbone of developing economies. In Eswatini, MSMEs contribute 50% to GDP, and in Zambia, 70%. However, although they generate jobs, income, and opportunity for millions, they are among the most exposed to climate shocks. Droughts, floods, and rising costs are already threatening their survival. Just as an example, in Eswatini, the 2016 El Nino drought led to a 30% decline in sugar production revenues, an estimated USD 20 million loss in cattle production, and resulted in an economic impact equivalent to 7% of GDP. Next slide, please. The objectives of this case study. The primary objective of this case study is to document and analyze the process undertaken by Eswatini and Zambia to develop their first national roadmap for greening the MSME sector. These roadmaps were designed to provide a coherent and actionable framework for guiding MSMEs towards sustainable, low-carbon, and climate-resilient best business practices. By identifying key barriers, enabling conditions, and sector-specific opportunities, the roadmaps aim to support inclusive green economic transformation while also aligning with national policies and international frameworks. The idea is also to offer replicable models for other AFI member countries pursuing similar transitions. Next slide. Although developed independently, both roadmaps followed a similar methodology. The process began with defining the scope and institutional arrangements, followed by a diagnostic study comprising literature reviews, stakeholder surveys, and mixed methods analysis to identify policy, financing, capacity, and coordination gaps related to green MSME development. These findings informed the roadmap formulation and the monitoring and evaluation framework, which was refined through iterative consultations and validation workshops with key stakeholders, including ministries, regulators, academia, to ensure ownership, coherence, and alignment with national priorities. Next slide, please. Key findings from the diagnostic phase. Unfortunately, because of the presentation, I've had to combine them, and in the case study, you'll find it a lot more detail. But both Eswatini and Zambia conducted surveys and interviews to understand MSMEs' awareness, challenges, and readiness for green finance. In Eswatini, over 100 MSMEs and several financial and government institutions participated. In Zambia, more than 200 responses were gathered through surveys and interviews. These were both qualitative and quantitative. Findings show that while MSMEs' awareness of climate change is growing, many still see green finance as a new or unfamiliar concept. The biggest constraints are financial, limited access to affordable funding, high cost of green technologies, but also structural, such as weak technical expertise and information gaps. Despite these barriers, most MSMEs expressed strong willingness to adopt sustainable practices if appropriate financing and guidance were available. Overall, the diagnostic phase confirmed that MSMEs recognized the potential of green finance, but face significant knowledge, capacity, and affordability gaps that must be addressed through targeted interventions and enabling policy frameworks. Next slide, please. There were also key findings from the supply side. Both Eswatini and Zambia show strong awareness of the importance of green business practices, but face persistent institutional, financial, and policy barriers that limit MSME participation in green finance. In both countries, green financing remains nascent and fragmented, with limited coordination across ministries. Furthermore, the absence of a green taxonomy and weak public-private partnerships hinder private sector investment. Institutional capacity gaps are another major constraint, with many financial and public institutions lacking the technical expertise to develop green products or assess climate-related risks. On the supply side, both countries' financial institutions cite similar obstacles: limited information on green finance opportunities and collateral requirements, and perceived risks of MSME lending. This results in few tailored products reaching smaller enterprises. Sorry. Next slide. During the diagnostic phase, especially for Zambia, I think Eswatini had already just finished their diagnostic. A peer learning exchange took place between Eswatini and Zambia, hosted by the Central Bank of Egypt under AFI's Joint Leadership Program. This proved instrumental in shaping both countries' green MSME roadmaps. Over 3 days, delegates engaged with regulators, financial institutions, and innovation hubs in Egypt, like the Credit Guarantee Company, the Egyptian Credit Bureau, and Nilepreneurs Institute, gaining practical exposure to Egypt's coordinated, policy-driven MSME ecosystem. The experience highlighted how integrated strategies, combining regulation, finance, and data systems, can help MSMEs transition from climate vulnerability to green opportunity. Key cross-cutting lessons included that strong coordination, alignment with global goals, and strong data systems and credit information infrastructure reduce risk and attract investment. Financial incentives, such as credit guarantees and subsidized loans, lower risks for MSME lending, and capacity building equips both entrepreneurs and institutions to adapt. Ultimately, the exercise reinforced that peer learning is about contextual adaptation and not replication. Next slide, please. The roadmap development process in both countries built on these detailed diagnoses that identified the policy, financial, market, and capacity gaps limiting MSMEs' green transition, while also mapping opportunities in emerging green sectors. So once the diagnostic phase was finished, the roadmap development phase began. They started by marking out their strategic priorities. In Eswatini, the roadmap focused on 4 main priorities: expanding green financial instruments like bonds and guarantees, strengthening the regulatory and incentive framework for green finance, deepening regional integration through SADC and South Africa to open green markets, and investing in long-term capacity building for both MSMEs and financial institutions. In Zambia, the emphasis was on embedding sustainability in MSME policy, improving access to finance through a green finance unit and concessional funding, promoting market awareness and behavioral change, and mainstreaming ESG and gender-responsive training to ensure inclusive capacity building. Both roadmaps include action plans. Eswatini developed a 5-step action plan, which provides MSMEs with practical tools to assess operations, set measurable goals, and adopt greener practices. Zambia's 9-part plan, aligned with national strategies, follows a phased approach, from foundational reforms, which are short-term, to market expansion, which is long-term. And they link it to MSMEs to green value chains and innovation hubs. Together, they show how structured, evidence-based planning can transform green policy ambition into concrete, actionable steps that empower MSMEs as key drivers of sustainable growth. Next slide, please. Along with the strategic priorities and action plan, they also developed, each one of them, a few other concrete things, but for the purpose of this presentation, I couldn't include it all, so I invite you to review the case study. But what they both had in common was that for both Eswatini and Zambia, they recognized that effective monitoring is critical to ensuring MSME's green transition, that they deliver measurable impacts. In Zambia, the roadmap includes a comprehensive M&E framework led by the Zambia Monitoring and Evaluation Association, the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, and the Ministry of MSME Development. It tracks progress through indicators covering awareness, finance, technology, policy alignment, and environmental outcomes, among others. Regular reviews assess interventions, whether they're on track, identify gaps, and ensure their roadmap remains adaptive and accountable. This approach turns policy intent into measurable, results-driven action. In Eswatini, the M&E framework serves as a self-assessment tool for MSMEs to measure their own sustainability progress. Businesses use tailored KPIs, such as energy savings, waste reduction, and lower emissions, to monitor environmental performance. These indicators are aligned with financial, climate, and adaptation principles to capture the true value of green actions. Regular benchmarking and feedback loops help MSMEs learn, adapt, and strengthen both environmental and financial performance over time. Together, these frameworks ensure that MSME greening is practical, transparent, and continuously improving. Next slide, please. Both Eswatini and Zambia's experiences show that unlocking green finance for MSME requires more than good policy. It demands coordinated action, practical tools, and ongoing engagement. First, access to green finance remains the biggest hurdle. MSMEs need concessional loans, guarantees, and simpler lending procedures to shift from smaller solar or efficiency upgrades to more transformative green investments. Second, MSME-centered policies are essential. Both countries demonstrated that success comes when strategies are built around MSME realities, combining diagnostics, stakeholder engagement, and tailored incentives that make sustainability achievable for small businesses. Third, coordination determines how fast progress happens. Eswatini's smaller ecosystem facilitated alignment, while Zambia's larger, more complex system required deliberate engagement and facilitation. In both cases, however, clear leadership and structured dialogue proved vital to sustain momentum. Finally, going beyond finance is key. Awareness campaigns, ESG training, and innovation incentives help MSMEs see the value of greening their operations. Continuous peer learning within AFI and across countries has also accelerated progress, allowing lessons to be shared and adapted effectively. Together, these insights show that inclusive green finance roadmaps work best when they combine finance, policy, capacity, and collaboration, anchored firmly around MSME needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the insight. In fact, though it's quite compact, but it still delve into the detail of the two countries. So from here we see how basically the two countries find really this topic which is relatively new, but they have the courage to step forward on starting on this topic. So before we go into the Q&A, I think we're going to take you through on the step-by-step, which is going to be shared by Ms. Eden Dema on the AFI toolkit. So from what Alexandra mentioned or shared earlier, you can see how it can be tailored or taking into the context of the national or respective jurisdictions of our members. So let me introduce the Eden Dema first. Okay, Miss Eden Dema is an inclusive finance policy, gender, and MSME expert. Eden Dema is a leading expert in inclusive finance for MSME policy with nearly 28 years of experience shaping financial sector reform across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. She began her career at the Central Bank of Bhutan in 1994 and becoming its first female deputy governor. She has led and advised more than 25 global projects with ADB, AFI, UNCDF, and the World Bank, and served as the AFI co-chair for Financial Inclusion Strategy Peer Learning Working Group in 2014 and 2015. A certified gender equality change maker, a certified digital finance practitioner, and a Fletcher School Fellow in financial inclusion leadership. She brings a unique blend of regulatory expertise, entrepreneurial insight, and global perspective of inclusive green finance and MSME. So without further ado, Eden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction, and I'll go straight into my presentation. So, okay, thank you. So in this session, as mentioned by Nick, I'll be presenting on the toolkit for greening MSMEs, which is part of the three-part AFI knowledge series, which is focused on inclusive green finance for MSMEs. Basically, the toolkit is designed to help policymakers, regulators, and other key stakeholders advance climate-smart financial inclusion with focus on MSMEs and women-led or owned MSMEs. So as mentioned earlier by my colleague Alexa, this toolkit builds on the 2024 AFI report on green transition measures for MSMEs. And this particular report has three key areas. One, it underscores MSMEs' vulnerability to climate risks, but at the same time, this report also recognizes the potential of MSMEs to drive sustainable change. And lastly, it calls for targeted policy support from regulators, policymakers, and other key stakeholders. This particular toolkit also draws from the 2025 case studies featuring national roadmaps for greening MSMEs from Eswatini and Zambia. And basically, the examples from the case studies show how inclusive green finance can be embedded into national roadmaps, again, to expand MSMEs' access to green finance and empower them as true agents of change. So finally, coming to the toolkit, this particular toolkit is not one size fits kind of a jacket. It's scalable, it's adaptive. So basically, it offers scalable strategies to align financial inclusion with green finance. So thereby enabling stakeholders like policymakers, regulators, MSMEs themselves, and the financial services provider to enable climate smart MSMEs and inclusive growth. Next slide, please. So what is the role of the toolkit? Are we on the same slide?
Do you want to be on the toolkit objectives slide?
I want to be on the second slide. From risks to resilience. Yes, yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. So let's look at what's the role of the toolkit. So I don't want to spend too much time. Basically, the whole idea of the toolkit is to transform climate risks to resilience. And so while saying that, we all know, and it has been reiterated time and again in reports, in studies, that MSMEs are the economic backbone of most countries. They make up around 90% of business and over 50% of jobs worldwide. However, despite their importance, around 70% of MSMEs in developing countries like ours, they are exposed to climate risks. Yet fewer than 20% of these MSMEs have access to formal green finance. Therefore, to address these gaps and challenges, policymakers, regulators around the world have introduced different kinds of initiatives to ensure, to tailor green finance to MSMEs needs. So basically, this toolkit is also, it supplements those initiatives. So it is, but then, as has been mentioned by Laura, the toolkit presents inclusive green finance not as a supplementary policy feature, but as a coherent, holistic policy methodology that integrates financial inclusion, climate resilience, and sustainable development. Not only that, we also need to recognize that regulators have increasingly, they recognize climate risks as an integral part of their financial stability mandate. And now climate risks is becoming more and more a priority for central bankers alike and financial regulators. So what do? So they have started embedding climate considerations into supervisory tools. For what? To ensure the stability of the financial system is safeguarded. So the tools are, the tools are such as stress test, capital adequacy reviews, risk assessment, and ESG disclosure, which are made mandatory. And these are being done, as I mentioned earlier, to protect MSMEs as well as the financial institutions. Lastly, the toolkit, it emphasizes MSMEs as active agents of green transformation. But then they underscore that to make them active agents of green transformation, we need to have supportive and inclusive financial systems. So by having such an inclusive system, MSMEs can drive structural change rather than remain as passive beneficiaries. So that is what the role of the toolkit is all about. Let's go to the next slide for the objectives. So what I have done is I presented the objectives in 4 quadrants. So to start with, this toolkit has a clear purpose. As to reiterate, it is again designed as a very simple guide to help policymakers, regulators, financial services providers, and MSMEs themselves to come together to develop inclusive green finance policies that can empower MSMEs in the true sense by supporting them to adopt sustainable practices, to facilitate them, to enable them to access green finance, use it, and contribute to climate adaptation and mitigation. As for the approach is flexible in terms of applying this toolkit. So it can be applied at the macro level, that is by regulators, policymakers, financial central bankers in shaping national policy and regulatory framework, or at the micro level, which will help financial institutions to develop MSME-centered green products as well as MSMEs in the green transition. And not only that, because we bring about a diverse experience from AFI member countries and also from our case studies, this particular toolkit is adaptable for countries which are in the different degrees or in different phases of IGF policy development. The focus of the toolkit is to design, develop, and implement targeted policies that address the real challenges, the key pain points that MSMEs face. My colleague Alexa has already talked about some of the key challenges that MSMEs in Eswatini and Zambia face, such as skills and knowledge gap on green business practices. If MSMEs do not have the required skills and knowledge, how do they understand the benefits of going green? The key primary barriers, especially from the supply side, limited access to green finance. Just to cite an example, from the 210 MSMEs that were surveyed in Zambia, 76% of them said that they rely on self-financing for their green transformation. And only 19% mentioned that they have access or they have accessed formal finance from the banks. So basically what it does, when you go have to go green, but you just have your own, you rely on your savings or your savings and assistance from your family and friends. Basically, it limits the ability of the MSMEs to afford green technologies, which doesn't come cheap. So therefore, the focus, like I mentioned earlier, is on targeted policies that address the key pain points. And not only that, policies should align with the country's sustainability goals and also ensure collaboration across sector, because it's an intersection between financial inclusion and green finance, so that MSMEs can leverage the green finance opportunities that the policy brings forward. And finally, the strength of this toolkit lies in its foundation. It synthesizes global best practices and technical insights from an array of toolkits, studies that has been developed by the Green Finance Platform, IFC, SPFN, and the World Bank. And not only that, we have also looked into AFI's key knowledge products and case studies from Eswatini and Zambia. Now, by integrating these insights with step-by-step policy phase guidance, I hope this toolkit will serve as a practical resource for advancing inclusive, scalable, and context-sensitive IGF strategies for countries within AFI membership or globally. I just want to mention one point that we need to note, because the MSME ecosystem is evolving, as well as the financial and the regulatory landscape. Therefore, to remain effective, the toolkit should be periodically updated to reflect the evolving MSME landscape, financial sector reforms, particularly relating to ESG standards and other green finance regulatory norms, as well as global climate and sustainability goals. Next slide, please. So coming to the policy process overview, the toolkit talks about, basically there are 3 stages of IGF policy development. The first is the planning phase. And I want to underline that countries have taken different approaches depending on their context. But one thing is common, which is when we design, when we develop IGF policy, we need to ensure we must align financial inclusion with green finance from MSME's perspective. So by embedding financial inclusion into green finance policies, we can empower MSMEs to become active agents of sustainable change. So as mentioned earlier, to guide this process, the toolkit provides a structured pathway which is built around 3 core phases. Like I said, the planning phase, the formulation, and the implementation, which I will go into more detail in the next slides. Now, what is important about this toolkit is that these phases of policy development can be tailored to different levels of institutional capacity, data availability, and market maturity, depending on the country context. Whether a country is just beginning to explore development of IGF policies or already have advanced IGF framework for MSMEs, it provides a flexible structure to move forward. So in short, this process, this adaptable process ensures that MSMEs are not left behind in the green transformation of any country. Next slide, please. So I would also like to mention that the toolkit has a variety of tools for policy development process. And this tool supports all 3 stages of policy development and how each phase, planning, be it planning, formulation, or implementation, each phase is supported by practical resources designed to foster country context sensitive and impact driven outcomes. Now, these tools include detailed activities under each phase, country examples from AFI member countries as well as other countries. For example, Papua New Guinea, Morocco, and of course, Zambia and Eswatini, and also developed countries like South Africa. So, and not only that, it also includes checklist outlining critical steps for each major task, along with targeted tips that highlight key success factors and best practices. Next slide, please. Now coming to the phase 1, that's planning. The planning phase basically establishes the foundation for legitimacy, alignment, and feasibility of the IGF policy, and it is anchored by 3 key activities. The first activity is appointing an institutional lead, which begins by designating a clear lead institution, which typically is the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, based on their mandate and convening authority to provide strategic direction in designing, developing, and implementing IGF policies for MSMEs. So for example, in the case of Zambia and Eswatini, the Minister of Finance, they led the design, development, and the implementation of the roadmaps for greening MSMEs. And not only that, once the lead institution is put in place, it is important to set up an inclusive governance structure. I stress the word inclusive, and this governance structure should comprise of the steering committee, the technical committee, and a green finance secretariat. And they should be having very clearly defined terms of reference, which will help in supporting the lead institution throughout the policy process. And this kind of structure will ensure there is broad ownership from all the stakeholders oversight, coordination, and transparency while keeping stakeholders actively engaged from the inception process to the implementation phase. I would also like to mention that based on the case studies and other country examples, the timing of governance structure establishment varies by country. While some countries establish it during the planning phase, others do it during the policy development, while some do it during the implementation. I have also included a tip on how to select a lead institution and also to map stakeholders' roles. More details you can get in the toolkit. Second activity. The second most activity is to conduct a diagnostic study to ensure the policy is an evidence-based policy and not policy-based evidence. So basically, one needs to undertake a diagnostic study, which my colleague Alexa has detailed, to ensure the policy is grounded in evidence, not shaped by assumptions. So this means basing decisions on facts, data, and research. Understand what's really happening. What is the status of MSMEs and green finance? Identifying what works, what are the success factors, and what doesn't. Persistent challenges, what are the opportunities, and using these insights to guide policy design. So I'll not go into the how of the diagnostic activity because that was covered. But what I would like to mention is that you can check table 2. Key activities and objectives of diagnostic study of the toolkit for more clarity as provided in the toolkit. Going to activity 3. Now, facilitate diagnostic consultations. Diagnostic workshops, they play a key role in designing the tools that is required to conduct studies, as well as surveys, interviews. So usually from the case studies in Zambia and Eswatini, we found out that 2 workshops are conducted. One, a pre-data collection workshop, which engages stakeholders to discuss the kind of tool, refine tools if it is already there, and to ensure context-specific insights. For example, in a country, if there are a number of counties, one needs to look at which are the counties or regions where MSMEs have the biggest challenge to access green finance. And the second workshop, which is held after the diagnostic studies conducted, it gathers feedback on the findings and the recommendation, basically on the analysis report or the diagnostic report. And the recommendations, like in the case of Zambia, it highlighted the requirement for women MSMEs to be included as a target sector or a target group in the Zambia roadmap for greening MSMEs. And similarly, it could also include rural MSMEs. It could also include youth-led MSMEs as well as informal MSMEs. And coming to the final outcome. So the final outcome of the diagnostic workshop is the final diagnostic report, which consolidates evidence into a shared reference document, which will then be ready to kick off the most important phase of the policy, that is the formulation phase. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the formulation phase is key to translating diagnostic insights into a unified vision and actionable policy. So there are 8 activities under this under this phase. The first activity is to establish inclusive committee. And this, I just want to make a note. This can be, as mentioned earlier, if you have already established inclusive committees, steering committee, task force, and a secretariat, one can look at how to adapt committee membership, maybe reconstitute the members or continue with the same members of the committees that has been established in the design phase. And why do we do this? It is to safeguard institutional memory, ensure consistency, and also uphold policy credibility. For example, the Papua New Guinea 2023 IGF policy was guided by a dual committee model, the steering committee and the task force, and that ensured a well-informed and participative policy formulation process. Second activity, facilitate capacity building programs. So basically, as we have seen from the case study, one of the key gaps or challenges that MSME face is the lack of skills to understand what green means. So therefore, it is, and it doesn't only apply to MSMEs, even the financial services providers. They have problems in understanding and implementing green finance regulations or guidelines, particularly ESG standards. Therefore, it is important to build the capacity of the stakeholders, especially financial services providers and MSMEs, to ensure they effectively participate in the policy formulation, as well as to align the expectations of the stakeholders, clarify their roles, and also foster ownership of the policy. And this, the capacity building programs includes providing tailored training programs on green finance concepts, climate-related risks, what are the needs, green finance needs of the MSMEs, and also to anticipate, understand what are the reforms that is required in the regulatory and policies to drive green finance for MSMEs. Then we define the strategic objectives and the policy measures. We should, again, as mentioned earlier, align with the stakeholders' needs, but also with the country's climate sustainability and development goals. The objectives and the policy measures must be evidence-based, should reflect the findings of the diagnostic studies, and not only that, and be responsive to the needs of the MSME and the other target groups like the women MSMEs or the youth-led MSMEs and the informal MSMEs. The strategic objective should be able to mobilize and channel green finance to MSMEs in a smart manner to position MSMEs as key drivers of the green economy. And policy measures should be feasible, cost-effective, and high impact by prioritizing those MSMEs with the greatest potential to overcome systematic barriers. You can also refer the checklist that has been provided in the toolkit for the objectives and the policy measures. The fourth one is, once we have the objectives in place, we draft the action plan. And the action plan is essential because it will translate policy into practice. And it lays out short, medium, and long-term milestones with clear roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders and also accountability. Now, as mentioned earlier, action plans also differ between countries, and it is shaped by the context-specific policy goals that they have, their institutional capacity, the landscape of the MSME, and also the regulatory maturity. How matured is the financial regulator in that country? And of course, the available resources that would be required to implement, to develop and implement the policy. So just to give an example, Zambia and Eswatini has two different models of action plan. Zambia has adopted a nationally integrated action plan, while Eswatini's action plan, the approach is more of a MSME sector specific. Now coming to activity 5, the most important, it is to develop a resource mobilization strategy. And what does it do? It identifies what are the funding gaps and how to leverage different sources of finance from the public, the private sector, including blended finance. And that should be done under a strong leadership. Like, for example, the Minister of Finance or the financial regulator, the capital market regulator. So these and also external donor agencies. So this is to ensure that sufficient financial, technical, and institutional resources are in place through this strategy to support effective policy implementation. And activity 6 is on peer learning. I'll not go into detail because it has already been mentioned in the earlier presentation. Activity 7 focuses on establishing a well-structured monitoring and evaluation framework, which ensures accountability and delivers measurable outcomes. And it should generate timely, reliable, and gender or MSME disaggregated data to track progress, identify gaps in the policy implementation, and also to support adaptive learning. Any changes that requires to be made, maybe through the midterm review, needs to be incorporated in the policy. Activity 8 is the last activity. Now that is to validate the draft policy. And this is again done through the stakeholder workshop that I mentioned earlier. So basically this workshop is the workshop that will bring together all the stakeholders to validate, refine, and finalize the policy. And this step builds ownership, it refines recommendations, and also secures consensus for policy adoption from all the stakeholders. And what should such a workshop do? The validation workshop should foster open dialogue. It should be open. It should encourage constructive feedback. And it should strengthen collective commitment to ensure the final policy is everybody's policy, is a holistic policy. For example, Zambia's Ministry of Finance, the lead institution, they convened a workshop, a validation workshop to validate Zambia's draft roadmap for greening MSMEs. And through the workshop, the outcome of the workshop was that the policy was revised because the initial draft policy had limited or it was not gender sensitive. Therefore, the revised final policy integrated gender responsive approaches, resulting in an updated inclusive roadmap. And not only that, a feedback summary was also one of the outcomes, demonstrating the value of conducting such a validation workshop. Next step, next slide, please. Sorry. So coming to the last phase, that's the implementation. So here we are moving from formulation to action. And this is where policy objectives begin to translate into measurable outcomes. And again, countries have taken different approaches, implementation approaches. And again, it is shaped, like I said, the maturity of their MSME ecosystem as well as their regulatory landscape. And not only that, also their capacity. For example, PNG, it paired its 2023 IGF policy with a detailed roadmap and assigned clear roles to institutions such as the Central Bank of PNG and microfinance providers, because MFIs were the ones who were serving the targeted MSMEs the most. Now, in contrast, Eswatini is supported by UNDP. In the case of Eswatini, it adopted a high-level strategic approach that focused on strengthening institutional capacity and stakeholder coordination. So basically, drawing on global best practices and also the country case studies, there are two key activities under the implementation, which is broken down into 6 practical sub-activities that you can see in the checklist and which is self-explanatory. So the first activity, the first key activity is to implement the action plan, and that is supported by activating the governance bodies and especially the Green Finance Secretariat to ensure the roles, responsibility, and timelines are carried out as planned in the action plan. Then it's very important to create awareness on the policy. So one is to develop and roll out the communication strategy. And the communication strategy will not only create awareness on the IGF policy, but it will also secure the stakeholders' buy-in necessary for the successful implementation of the policy. Then one can start launching green finance instrument, credit lines, guarantees, concessional loans, regulatory incentives, so that MSMEs have access to resources that enable their green transition. And it is extremely important to note that when you roll out green products or services, one critical safeguard is the application of a green taxonomy. If you don't have, one needs to develop a green taxonomy to guide financial flows towards genuinely green activities and SMEs. And this helps ensure policy credibility and protects against greenwashing. Under the second activity, that's conducting monitoring and evaluation by operationalizing the monitoring and evaluation framework that was developed during the formulation phase. And basically, it will ensure policy measures lead to tangible outcomes, build stakeholders' trust, and enable adaptive, inclusive green growth. The framework has to be complete with key performance indicators that are more centered around the key policy areas, as well as reporting systems, off-site surveillance, on-site inspection, which will help track progress, assess responsiveness, and measure impact. Some of the tools one can use are dashboards, and also when the policy is halfway through implementation, one can also conduct midterm reviews as well as independent evaluations after the completion of the implementation to track progress, coordinate action, and also to reinforce all these tools will reinforce transparency and accountability. So for more details, please refer the toolkit's checklist for monitoring and evaluation activities to which will guide you how to plan and conduct this activity. So with that, I come to the last slide. So the toolkit also provides a few recommendations in terms of how to design, develop, and implement impactful IGF policies for MSMEs, which I have put in 4 quadrants. So the first quadrant, high-level recommendation, is about governance and coordination. This particular recommendation emphasizes building strong governance and coordination mechanism throughout the policy process. How to do it? One can look more detail into the toolkit. Another recommendation is the importance to clarify the scope of the policy in terms of distinguishing between green. Are you trying to focus on green finance or sustainable finance or climate finance? What kind of MSMEs are you targeting? Are you targeting all the MSMEs or MSMEs which has potential to go green? Or so these are the kind of one needs to be very clear in terms of the scope of the policy, in terms of target groups, as well as the finance. And this will help maintain focus, coherence, and impact throughout the 3 policy stages. The second quadrant is all about inclusion and equity, and it basically underscores the importance of embedding inclusion and equity by prioritizing high risk and high potential MSMEs, women-led, youth-led, rural enterprise, informal MSMEs, who are often excluded but they hold immense potential for resilience and innovation in the green growth. The other thing we need to understand is cost and benefits also must be shared in ways that do not disadvantage these groups, including ensuring that compliance or green transition costs don't fall disproportionately on those who are least able to bear them. So in simple terms, one needs to look at how to come up with proportionate regulations, how to come up with proportionate policies so that everything, the regulations, the policies are fair and square. So to do that, to uphold inclusion and equity, IGF policy should include mechanisms that prevent marginalization and at the same time create equitable pathways for all MSMEs to equally participate and benefit from this green transformation. The third quadrant is on capacity and phased implementation. It highlights the importance of having a policy that is pragmatic. Policy should be achievable and not aspirational. Policy ambition should balance with institutional capacity, both in terms of financial and human. Which means to say you need to align your policy objectives and measures with the available resources, timeline, and implementation capabilities of the key stakeholders. Not only that, a phased approach to implementation. Short, medium, long term. It creates space for adaptation and also continuous improvement to ensure the implementation progress is realistic and also sustainable. The fourth quadrant talks about, recommendation talks about communication and accountability, and that is to build trust and ensuring accountability. Just to cite an example, in the case of Zambia, when the majority of the MSMEs who were surveyed, the first thing they asked was, what is this roadmap going to bring us in terms of benefit? So the point that I'm trying to make is that communication is very important. One can have a very good policy, but if the message is not passed well and understood by the MSMEs, then they will not see any benefit of adopting green practices. And that goes to the financial services providers also. They will not see any benefit in coming up with green products and services. So effective communication is very important to raise awareness, foster engagement, and also strengthen stakeholders' confidence in the policy. And at the same time, one needs to have in place a robust monitoring and evaluation framework, like I said earlier, to track progress, measure impact, enable adaptive learning for continuous improvement of the policy. So to close, across this recommendation, high-level recommendations of governance, inclusion, capacity, and accountability, this recommendation actually provides a balanced policy approach, one that is inclusive, pragmatic, adaptive, which will position MSMEs at the heart of green and resilient economies through a very inclusive and just IGF policy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Miss Eden, who brought us, and enlightened us on the step by step of this toolkit. Indeed, what you mentioned, Eden, I think I recognize the last one that you mentioned about the communication, which is very vital in communicating the right kind of message to the target group, MSME, in this context, where this is where we get the buy-in from the the target group. So now we'll still have few more minutes for Q&A. So I open the floor for our participant to ask questions to both of our speakers, Miss Alexandra and also Miss Eden. And then you can unmute yourself, or you can also post your questions in the chat box. Do you have a questions, anyone? Okay, to get the ball rolling, maybe I can start first if there is no one yet. So yeah, I have a couple of questions, but I think after the introduction made by Alexandra and Eden, I think I have new questions. First questions to Alexandra. We've seen these two countries have, just completed the roadmap. So how do we make sure that this roadmap won't be stay in on the shelf, or how to get the buy-in, because you did mention about the stakeholders engagement. You did mention about a different kind of like engagement with the ministry, the agency. So how do we make sure that this can be implementable, though that we understand all the steps taken mentioned by Eden earlier? So maybe Alexandra, you can start first.
Thank you. So for both Eswatini and Zambia, they do have an implementation phase design, let's say. I'm not sure if I'd call it an action plan, but they have structured an implementation phase. In the case of Eswatini, this is going to entail demonstration projects, training, and regulatory reforms supported by international expertise in financing. The Center for Financial Inclusion will be taking the lead, and they have formed also a partnership with UNDP that's already advancing this agenda by recruiting technical support, expanding advisory services, and developing a pipeline of green MSME projects. In the case of Zambia, they have developed also a sort of, let's say, implementation action plan and stakeholder framework to advance their roadmap, and the Ministry of Finance, as the lead implementation agency, is mobilizing the necessary resources to initiate the first phase of the roadmap implementation, which, if you remember, within the action plan, they had a short-term, mid-term, long-term. And they're focusing right now on the creation of the Green Finance Unit. As we saw, funding is one of really the main hurdles. So they're looking at funding to be drawn from a mix of sources, including government budget allocations, international climate finance, private sector investments, and donor contributions. And so yes, they've both planned for this and have already started engagements with partnerships to move forward. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Yes, I just want to echo on what Alexandra mentioned here, but also to connect on what Eden rightly mentioned earlier. My question would be, because we have member who have a different kind of like development in terms of this new so-called new theme on greening, particularly greening MSME. So, the one that you mentioned, the three stages, Eden, like, from planning, formulation, and implementation, it's more like a cookie cutter. But what if member who comes in between, maybe like, in terms of planning, they are not like, as strictly steps, but earlier, like you mentioned, but they are in the formulations already. So do they need to go back to make sure that, it complete the whole ecosystem, or it can move from there? And how basically they want to pick up from there to make sure that it will become holistic as what being advised or advocates through this toolkit. Please, Eden. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for the question. Now, as regards this particular example that you gave, where a member institution is already into formulation, so do they have to go back to the diagnostic phase? So, let me cite few examples. It depends. The answer would be it depends. Why I'm saying this is because while this particular toolkit provides the very generic stages of a policy development, but in reality, and we have seen, I myself have seen, being a policymaker, developing a strategy, often um, uh, financial regulators or even the central banks do not have the necessary resources to conduct a diagnostic study at that point of time. So therefore, that includes Ministry of Finance as well. If the budgeting is not done, then where do we get the resources? So what I would like to mention is, in such a case, for those for a country which is already into formulation, I would say, like I mentioned earlier, no matter how you develop the policy, it should be based on evidence. Otherwise, you will be coming up with a policy that will require evidence to support it. It will be an assumption. So it's as simple as that. So in this case, what I would mention again from my own experience, one could look at the kind of studies that has been done. One very global study, the Global Findex, the other one, the MSMEs service by the World Bank. And there are many FinScope service that has been done specifically, like in the case of Kenya or Zambia, very sector-specific service. And if we have such kind of service, then one needs to just have supplement it with very simple follow-up um, quantitative service, I would say. So I hope I answered your question.
Indeed, thank you so much, Eden. So I think that's also round up like some of the activity that have been conducted by members, like what you mentioned, the FinScope, and then it can be supplemented with like a smaller scale of survey just to make sure that it complements the whole kind of like what do you call this uh, uh informations about the greening for MSME. And I think, as you rightly mentioned, taxonomy is very much important. It's as good as like if you want to have like MSME roadmap, you need to have a proper national definition for MSME just to make sure that it cover the whole countries, and also it will be at a standard kind of like definition. So, do we have questions? I'm just like, warming up the stage now. So, if we have questions from the floor, Laura, do we have anyone from the chat? Anyone?
I don't see any. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So, I think, yes, please. Anyone there? Yes.
Yeah, Roberto from Central Bank of El Salvador. Nice to see
Yes,
everyone.
yes, Roberto.
I just wanted to ask because I was wondering when the presenter was saying about inclusion and equity, they were saying that we have to prioritize high risk and high potential MSMEs. Is this a recommendation depending on the context of the country, or is it something that we should all take into consideration when we are trying to do all these IGF policies?
Sure. Thank you, Roberto. So, Eden or Alexandra, any of you would like to address the questions from Roberto in terms of the MSME sector. So, is it applicable to all, or it's only formal? I think that's basically what Roberto mentioned, because I think in one of the slides we did mention about the informal, the vulnerable groups. Yeah.
So when we talk about inclusion and equity, I just the one that I showcased, underscored, was coming more from the Zambia case study, in which the greening roadmaps, greening MSMEs roadmaps, the target groups are women-led, youth-led, and rural enterprises. But it depends again. It depends on what your policy, what is your target, what are the target segments of your policy. So if it is women MSMEs, then I think it is important. But overall, I would say that any inclusive green finance policy that is being developed, that's been designed and developed, is basically looking at which are the groups which are financially excluded and has the highest potential for green transformation. So basically, those two things needs to be taken into account to ensure that these two objectives are met. But as mentioned earlier, again, my answer would be it depends.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
I would
Eden.
just add just quickly, because I agree highly with Edith. This had to do a bit with the different approach between Zambia and Eswatini. Zambia really had a focus on inclusivity and wanting to really bring in gender, rural, and other vulnerable groups. In the case of Eswatini, for example, and I wasn't able to cover it in the presentation, but one of their first steps in the roadmap development was a creation of a very high level classification of businesses by their role in the value chain, alignment with SDGs, and potential impact on green objectives. And by doing this, they saw that maybe this was a quote unquote easier approach to starting to address MSME green financing. And so, for example, they saw that they classified, for example, what they considered champions, so actively advancing sustainability, high ESG scores, and these could be utilities adopting climate resilient infrastructure. And then following that, they had what they called contributors, which support sustainability via services and tools, and they have moderate to high ESG scores, and these could be tech firms or financial institutions. And so therefore, I think there's different approaches. Some might want to go for slightly quicker wins, let's say, but implementable, and others might really want to focus on that broader, more inclusive approach.
Thank you, Eden and Alexandra. I think it goes back to what Eden mentioned earlier, also the objective, as well as what Alexandra mentioned. It goes back to the perspective of the country. So, is there any other questions from the floor?
There's
Going
one by
once.
Samuel
I see
Tarinda.
Samuel Tarinda.
Yes, Sam, please, my brother.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, mine is not a question, but just to comment. I enjoyed very much the presentation by Eden. Unfortunately, I missed the Alexandra's presentation. I was not connected yet, but thank you very much for giving us a lot of insights. For some of us in Zimbabwe, we're already implementing a number of financial inclusion strategies, and I think it's the toolkit to empower us in terms of aligning these strategies in the lenses of green financing, as Eden said. And I also liked what you said in terms of making evidence-based policies and not policy-based evidence. I like that very much. And I think this is very helpful and insightful. And the examples that you were giving, ourselves being a neighbor to Zambia and South Africa, I think we have some good case studies to learn from, and also even Eswatini and the other countries. Thank you very much for such a powerful presentation.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's always a pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. So,
Hi, this is Amila
yes.
from Central Sri Lanka.
Yes, Brother Amila, please.
I have two questions. First of all, let me congratulate the two presenters, Alexa and Eden, for wonderful presentations, very insightful, especially given the context that we are going to develop the second phase of our inclusion strategy. Under that, we have dedicated a separate pillar for greening MSMEs. So this was really a helpful presentation. And I'm just asking what sort of a plan of attack we should have, because we are not going to have a separate policy for that, but we have a separate pillar in our main national financial inclusion strategy. So what sort of actions the presenters recommend for us to go ahead with? And also another technical question with regard to the sample size of those two surveys. Is it representative enough for a larger MSME community in those countries? Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Amila, for the two questions. Please, Eden and Alexandra, if you can address those questions. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, maybe if I could start with the diagnostic part, and Eden, you can take the other side. So it's true that the MSME surveys and institutional surveys were not huge. It's not a Findex study, let's say. But from what I gathered from both roadmap developments, they provided, so they did a purposive sampling strategy to ensure representation both across sectors as well as regional representation, with a specific emphasis on MSMEs significantly affected by climate change. So that's one. And they did feel that it provided valuable insights into environmental awareness, business challenges, and support needs. So it's true it wasn't statistically representative of the entire MSME landscape for each country, but the sample, at least they felt, and it seems to me, offered a credible snapshot of prevailing trends and gaps. And I think that it's just something that one has to take into account the reality, and it's very hard to get, an enormous size sampling. So I think it was useful in both cases, because it's really important within the diagnostic phase to get that feedback from the MSMEs. So that would be at least my point of view.
Yes, for the second question, in terms of, if I heard you right, you have a pillar for MSMEs, but it is within the NFI, your NFIS. So I think from my own experience, I would say that most countries have such kind of approach, which means integrating MSMEs as part of the national strategy. So in that case, how do you address the financial needs of the MSMEs? And this is going to be a very huge bucket list, I would say. So let me cite my own experience from the Solomon Island and also from Cambodia. So Solomon Island had a national financial inclusion strategy, and they had women as a segment target. But then what they found out, what we found out actually during the review of the strategy was that the first strategy, despite having women as a key target, along with actions, key policy actions and measures and all, during the review of the first NFIS, it was found that not much progress was made in terms of women's financial inclusion. Therefore, in the second phase, in the second version of the NFIS, what the Central Bank of Solomon Island did was to have a separate sub-strategy on women to address the gender gap in financial inclusion, basically advancing women's financial inclusion. So that is one. So I just want to mention that one can have a sub-strategy, and the sub-strategy approach would be applying the simpler version of the methodology that I mentioned earlier from the toolkit. And I also want to bring the example of Cambodia. Cambodia had a financial education and financial literacy as a pillar in their NFIS. But then what they did was they came up with a sub-strategy, a separate roadmap focusing on how to enhance digital financial literacy, including digital literacy for the segment groups. So I hope that answers your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Eden. Thank you, Eliza. So do we have any more questions from the floor? I didn't see anything from the chat, but maybe if we have anyone from the floor. Okay. So I think there's
Sorry, Nick. No, I don't see any. Sorry, Nick. I don't see any further question. I just would like to jump into.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Right, there's no more.
I don't see any other question. I think my internet is quite unstable. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Is it from my side or
it's not working? No,
yeah, I think
voice
Laura, I
breaking.
think you're breaking up a bit in terms of the connections.
Yeah, I think it's my internet. I hope that
Yes.
you hear me now.
Okay.
I don't see further questions, but I just would like to
you're breaking up a bit. Okay. So I think
I've shared the links to the knowledge product, and also I share
we've come to the
the
end of
summaries of each
our
knowledge product.
discussion today. And then yeah, now much better.